Welcome back to our journey through the American Civil War. As 1862 dawned, the conflict was escalating across multiple fronts, setting the stage for some of the war's most brutal and decisive battles. Out west, in the rugged terrain of Arkansas, Union General Samuel Curtis and his Army of the Southwest faced a daunting challenge. But Union scouts were sharp. They caught wind of the Confederate movement, and Curtis, instead of waiting to be attacked, decided to meet the threat head-on. He turned his army around, and on March 7th, the Battle of Pea Ridge erupted. The Confederates' initial hopes were shattered almost immediately. General Ben McCulloch, leading one of the two Confederate columns, was shot and killed early in the fighting. Shortly after, his second-in-command, James McIntosh, also fell. Suddenly, half of the Confederate force was leaderless and in disarray. Despite this chaos, the other column under General Sterling Price fought fiercely, and by nightfall, the Confederates had managed to capture Elkhorn Tavern. But their success was short-lived. The next day, Curtis launched a massive, coordinated counterattack. The Union artillery pounded the Confederate lines, and the Federal infantry charged forward, pushing the exhausted and disorganized Southerners back. The Confederates were forced to retreat, securing Missouri for the Union and giving the North a critical foothold in Arkansas. The tide in the West was turning. Meanwhile, back east, the Union faced a different kind of problem: its own top general, George B. McClellan. McClellan was brilliant at organizing and training his massive army of the Potomac. But he was famously cautious, constantly overestimating the enemy's strength and clashing with President Lincoln over strategy. After the dramatic but inconclusive duel between the ironclads Monitor and Merrimack, all eyes turned to the Confederate capital of Richmond. Lincoln wanted a direct, overland march on the city. McClellan disagreed. He proposed a massive amphibious operation, moving his 100,000-man army down the coast to Fort Monroe and then advancing up the Virginia Peninsula, using the Union Navy for support. Lincoln, despite his reservations, reluctantly gave his approval. The Confederates, however, had anticipated just such a move. Even though they were heavily outnumbered, they were prepared. McClellan, convinced he was facing an army as large or larger than his own, advanced with agonizing slowness. When he reached the Confederate defenses at Yorktown, instead of launching a swift assault, he settled in for a month-long siege. This was exactly what the Confederates wanted. When they were ready, they simply packed up and slipped away under the cover of darkness, falling back to reinforce Richmond. McClellan, however, declared the capture of the empty fortifications a great victory, completely unaware that he had just given his enemy a month to prepare for his arrival. The Union Army pursued the retreating Confederates, and at Williamsburg, General Joseph Hooker's division slammed into a fortified position at Fort Magruder. The fighting was intense. Confederate counterattacks initially threw Hooker's men back, but the arrival of Union reinforcements under the fiery General Philip Kearny stabilized the line. After a day of bloody combat, the Confederates continued their planned withdrawal toward Richmond. Once again, McClellan claimed a major victory, but the reality was that the Confederates were brilliantly executing their strategy of delay. While McClellan was inching his way toward Richmond, a storm of violence erupted in Tennessee. On the morning of April 6th, Confederate General Albert Sidney Johnston launched a massive surprise attack on Ulysses S. Grant's army, which was camped near a small log church called Shiloh. The Union soldiers were caught completely off guard. Many were still cooking breakfast when the Confederates came screaming out of the woods. The initial assault was a stunning success, pushing the disorganized Federal troops back several miles toward the Tennessee River at a place called Pittsburgh Landing. For a moment, it looked like Grant's entire army might be destroyed. But as the day wore on, the Union lines began to stiffen. Critically, lead elements of Don Carlos Buell's army began arriving as reinforcements. Then, tragedy struck the Confederates. General Johnston, while leading from the front, was struck in the leg by a stray bullet. The wound severed an artery, and he bled to death on the battlefield, becoming the highest-ranking American officer ever killed in combat. Command passed to General P.G.T. Beauregard. As darkness fell, Beauregard, believing the Union Army was defeated, called off the attack for the night. It was a fatal mistake. Overnight, thousands more of Bulle's troops arrived, and Grant reorganized his battered forces. The next morning, it was the Union's turn to attack. They drove the surprised Confederates from the field. Shiloh was technically a Union victory, but it came at a horrifying cost. The two-day battle resulted in over 23,000 casualties, more than all previous American wars combined. The sheer carnage shocked both the North and the South, revealing the true, brutal nature of the war. Despite the horror of Shiloh, late April brought a major strategic victory for the Union. The capture of New Orleans. A powerful naval fleet under Admiral David Farragut steamed past the forts guarding the mouth of the Mississippi River and forced the surrender of the Southwest's largest city. With New Orleans in Union hands, the North now controlled the southern end of the Great River, a critical step in their plan to split the Confederacy in two. But the Confederates still had heroes capable of daring feats. In Virginia's Shenandoah Valley, General Stonewall Jackson was about to launch one of the most brilliant campaigns in military history. Facing off against Union General Nathaniel Banks, Jackson used speed, deception, and audacity to outmaneuver his much larger opponent. After a series of skirmishes, Banks began a hasty retreat down the valley. Jackson was in hot pursuit. He split his forces, sending part of his army on a wide flanking march to cut off the Union retreat. Near the towns of Middletown and Newtown, Jackson's men crashed into the side of Banks's long strung-out column, sending the Federal wagons and soldiers scattering in panic. The rest of Banks's army fled toward the city of Winchester. On May 25th, Jackson struck. He first attacked the Union left flank on a rise called Camp Hill, but seeing a better opportunity, he quickly shifted his main effort to Bowers Hill on the Union right. The attack was swift and decisive. The Union line crumbled in less than an hour, and the Federal soldiers fled through the streets of Winchester. The town's residents, who were overwhelmingly pro-Confederate, erupted in celebration. They fired on the retreating Union soldiers from their windows and cheered wildly as Jackson's foot cavalry marched into the city. Jackson himself described the scene as near frantic with joy. His lightning campaign had not only defeated a Union army, but had also created a major strategic crisis for Washington, forcing Lincoln to divert troops intended for McClellan's Richmond campaign to deal with the threat in the valley. By the summer of 1862, the war had reached a new level of intensity. From the mountains of Arkansas to the swamps of Virginia, armies clashed in battles of unprecedented scale and ferocity. The Union was making gains, but the Confederacy, led by brilliant and daring commanders like Jackson, was far from defeated. The road ahead was still long, and much more blood would be spilled. Thanks for watching. If you found this video informative, please give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next episode. We'll see you next time.